listen to medicine? Let's see. It's a privilege again to be with you today to talk about a very important topic, the topic of Christian medical ethics. I'd like to know if you have a medical background, medical education, or an interest in medicine. Would you put your hand up so I can see it? That's a person there. Okay, super. And how many of you have had some kind of a lecture or done some reading on medical ethics? Okay, good. So you may know more about this topic than I do. We're going to talk about several what we might call hot topics in ethics today. And before we do that, we'll have an introduction. I'll go ahead and give you the next slide. So what's medical ethics? It's the obligations of a moral nature that govern the practice of medicine. The principles of conduct prescribing what we ought to do. So it's no more or no less than making the right decision about what to do with a patient at that time. There are ethics committees at hospitals that help doctors to make ethical decisions, but some of the things we're going to talk about today are outside of just regular day-to-day medical care. Go ahead. So in the past, medical decisions were based on codes. Who knows the name of Hippocrates? You heard of Hippocrates before? He was a man who lived before the time of Christ, and he made a very famous code, the Code of Hippocrates, and we use that as an oath in medicine. They've used it for years to describe what is the best way to practice ethically. And basically, if you look at the history of medicine until about the beginning of the 20th century, people were pretty much in agreement about what was ethical and what was not ethical. And Hippocrates was one of the ways that we came into that agreement. So if you show me the next slide, here's the Code of Hippocrates. And it looks like it's really going to be hard to read. So, my print's too small. All right, so basically what Hippocrates wrote, wonderful, is he initially swore by all the gods and goddesses that he would fulfill his oath. So he applied to the divine. We don't believe in Apollo, we don't believe in all the gods and goddesses, we believe in the one true God and Jesus Christ, his son. But he appealed to the divine in his oath. He was very serious about it. He gave ideas about dietetic measures. He said he would never give a deadly drug to anyone who asked for it. He would never give a woman an abortive remedy. He was against abortion. He was against euthanasia. He was against physician-assisted suicide. And that's what medicine was. He said whatever house he would visit, he would go for the benefit of the sick. He would remain free of all intentional injustice, all mischief, in particular sexual relationships with both male and female persons, be they free or slaves. So he recognized that the intimate relationship between a patient and a physician was such that there could be temptation to sexual relations. And he denied that in medicine. That was not allowable. And then the last thing that I included today when we talk about his oath is that he would keep things confidential. He would not tell abroad what people said and what he heard with his. So if you move there we go, there they are. So this is the commentary. This was what people believed and taught up until the 20th century. So we appeal to God to be faithful as physicians. We, as medical persons, our goal of treatment was to do no harm. Abortion and physician-assisted suicide were forbidden. Ethical conduct was demanded, and confidentiality was ensured. So that's the picture of medical ethics that existed until this last century. Unfortunately, lots of things have changed. And why have they changed? What do you think? Has medical knowledge gotten bigger or smaller? Huge. So much knowledge, yes, it's enormous. And is what happens with the doctor, what happens in the hospital, is it Is it quiet, covered up, or do people actually see it? The newspapers carry it, don't they? The news talks about patients. If there's a question, everybody sees it. So everything is public property. The specialization makes it impossible for one person to know everything. There's no way that a doctor can know everything about medicine. It's so big, it's so huge. And we live right now in a moral vacuum. It all honors tolerance. Do you know that word, tolerance? That means that whatever you do is fine as long as you don't step on my toes. So whatever you believe is fine. Whatever you do in your bedroom is fine. Whatever you do with somebody is fine. That's tolerance. And so there's no agreement on how to make decisions because everybody's ideas are the same. And the last point that really pertains to third world countries, to places like Africa where there are less resources, is that things cost so much that we have to decide where to use the money. So your countries, where you've come from, they've got a limited budget. They're not able to provide all the fancy care that maybe somebody could get in the UK or in the United States. So what's right and what's wrong? Is it right for a woman in Nigeria not to be able to get treatment for her breast cancer when someone in the UK can? Is it right for someone in Nigeria not to be able to, for their child to die of malaria when someone in South Africa, their child would not die? Understand? So there's all these questions that we have to answer in regard to medical ethics. And there's so many different subjects. I'm not going to go into them right now, but I really encourage you to spend time trying to make your own mind up about what the Bible says about medical ethics and about each one of the subjects we're going to talk about. There's some really good resources out there. The things that I think I can recommend for you the most are the statements of medical societies, Christian medical societies like CMDA, that's the Christian Medical and Dental Association in the United States. So almost every country has a Christian medical society, and they make statements and position statements about what is right and what is wrong in medicine. This is one paper right here, very excellent, a wonderful description of looking at ethics and how we make decisions about medical care. And then in addition to that, we have to know the laws. We have to know the legal documents that discuss the laws that pertain to medical ethics. We're going to talk about this document, which is some of the law in Ukraine. Okay, so since we're living in Ukraine right now, we're going to talk about Ukraine's laws and how they pertain to right of conscience, one of the questions that we're going to talk about. All right, so before we go on, I'm going to describe, we can go to that slide, that's fine, yeah. I'm going to describe a general approach to Christian medical ethics, and then I'm going to take any questions that you have, okay? And then we'll go on with specific points. So the first thing that we know is that all human beings have been individually created through the providential creation and interest and design of God. So He created us, we have inestimable worth. Every single person in this room is incredibly is incredibly expensive, incredibly important to God. More important than any building, government, you are infinite worth. And each person is very complex, yes? I looked at you today praying and talking to God, thinking about what God wanted you to do. Your body, your mind, your spirit, all those things were working, yes? You're moving, you're praying, you're thinking, your soul, your spirit, all of those things were all a composite of very different factors. And God's given us minds, hasn't He? He's given us minds that are capable of exploring, but only partially understanding His creation. So the creation that we have is incredible. What God made, what He put into this earth, and what He put into a human body. We can't know it all. So God has given us responsible stewardship of creation, both of ourselves and of this world. We have incredible potential. Right now we have amazing technology. So the question is, what should we do with that technology? What's right? What's morally right? What's ethically right? All right. So before we go on to these topics, is there anyone that has a question about what I've said? Do you understand the basic idea of ethics, the choices that we have to make about caring for our patients? Do you understand the original rules for doctors, that we would be chaste, that we would be honest, that we would be against killing of any sort? Any questions about that? All that makes sense? Okay, good. All right, so we're going to go over these topics, and hopefully we'll have enough time to talk about each one of them and to discuss their importance. It's obvious that we don't have enough time today to thoroughly talk about each one of these topics, and there are many, many topics. I actually have a list of about 30 different topics that we could talk about. So I chose what I thought was important, and we're going to start with the beginning of human life. That one's the next slide. Okay? So where does life start? It starts at fertilization. Okay, the best example that we have of that is Jesus Christ. He was incarnated. So in the womb, he was conceived. And life begins at conception, and people have taken the idea of fertilization and conception and stretched it out to say that a person is only a person when they implant in the womb. So even though sperm and egg meet, if they don't implant in the womb, if they don't continue to grow, it's not a person. The Bible doesn't say that. So the Bible says that life begins at conception, that from the very, very beginning, from fertilization, we have the full moral worth afforded to every person from fertilization onward to the development. We cannot say that a person has no rights because they're tiny, because everything that's necessary to make a full person is in that fertilized egg, everything. So there's a big debate in medicine about whether or not people's lives begin at creation or at conception or not, at fertilization, and the Bible's very clear that they do. So when we talk about human beings' lives, a lot of times, and this has happened over the centuries, for economic reasons, for political reasons, people have said people don't matter very much. For the better good, for the good of society, we need to get rid of these people or that people, and that's not what the Bible teaches. So you can go on to the next slide. Looks like it's going to be, all right, here we go. So procreation is the word that we use to describe what people do when a husband and a wife make a baby, when they have sexual intercourse. We can't create matter, but we procreate. We put our genetic material together, and we make people that God gives to us. That's the God-ordained means of filling the earth. So who knows the verse in Genesis 1, 27 and 28? What's it say there? Anybody? Yeah, so we're supposed to multiply and fill the earth, yes? That's the goal of God. He wanted us. That's his ordained means of filling the earth with human beings made in his image. That's the proper reproductive expression of human sexuality and marriage. So God creates beings in the image of God. They're people that have soul, spirit, body, and that is life. So they have the image of God that constitutes the single essential nature of human life. And so the biblical view of human life beginning at fertilization is consistent with the biblical view of human life. So I don't think there's anybody in this room that debates that question, but that is a very strongly debated question in our world today. When does life begin? The Bible says it begins at conception. It begins at fertilization. It begins when two genetic material from two people, a husband and a wife, meet together and become one new person, a procreated person God gave a child. So that's That's the beginning of life. And of course, that matters in regards to abortion. It matters in regards to the status of people in general. If people are created in the image of God, if from the very beginning God molds and makes them, then they're special and important. Every single person is important, and our attitude about them needs to be there. All right, let's talk a little bit about allocation of resources. Any questions about the beginning of life? Like I said, I think that's a pretty standard idea that we all know that life begins at fertilization. All right, allocation of health resources. What can we do with that one? Well, when we talk about the increasing ability to treat things and the increasing costs of treating them, then we have to make the decision about what services we can provide and what services we can't provide. So very, very hard questions. As I mentioned before, I spent 2 months in Uganda working at a children's hospital with very, very limited resources. I spent a month and a half working at a hospital in China. I spent a good part of my adult life in America working at hospitals there. And now I've been, for 20 years, here in the former Soviet Union working at clinics and across Russia and Ukraine. So I've seen a lot of different places. And I know a lot about the allocation of money that the government provides for care. So if you can imagine, the United States right now has the largest percentage of money from its budget allocated to healthcare. It's about 16%. If you look at the Soviet Union and how much money that they put into healthcare, any guesses? It's about 2%. So what I'm saying is that governments and people make choices, priorities about what's most important. And if a government makes a choice that health isn't very important and they want to spend money on other things, on lifestyle, on entertainment, on education, on defense, the communist years saw a lot of money in defense because Russia was afraid of attacks from other countries and they were aggressive, so they needed their weapons. So there's an old saying, you can't make guns and butter. In other words, meaning that you either spend money on defense or you spend money on other things. So the health of the country suffered because most of the money went to defense. And unfortunately, that's a problem in African countries as well. Some of the times, the problem is corruption. So money is siphoned off from the health budget, it's siphoned off from places where it needs to be, and goes into the pockets of other people. And that continues to happen here until this day. So the decisions we make about how much money we're going to allocate for health do have a great deal to bear on the health of our. This is a picture of a little boy who had sickle cell disease at that hospital that I was mentioning in Uganda. Yeah, his name was Happy. No, his name was Lucky. That's what it was. Yeah. So if you'll go over here for me, Christian doctors have a responsibility in helping decide who will receive available healthcare resources. What I want to encourage you are important people in God's eyes. You will go back, most of you, to your countries. You will be active in healthcare there. And if you don't advocate for decisions about healthcare resources, then who's going to make that decision? Do you understand? If Christians don't make the decision, then other people will make it for you. So, and they may not have the interest, the good of people at heart. They will be interested in giving money to people who are wealthy or have some other kind of privilege, which is not the way God values life. Okay, so what I want to encourage you to do is to be an advocate for the poor, to be an advocate for the people who need health care, to learn more about how resources are allocated in your country, what's available to your patients, and to make good choices about not to be afraid of those decisions, not just to say, oh, I can't decide that, I'm too little, I'm not important. You're very important. God wants to use you. He wants to use you in your countries to reach and help and provide resources for the people that are there. Any questions about allocation of resources? Okay, all right, let's go on. This is probably one of the things when people talk about medical care and medical ethics that it always comes up. Stem cell research. So who knows what a stem cell is? Anybody tell me? Somebody want to stand up and tell us what a stem cell is? Nobody's daring enough to do it.
Cells that give rise to other cells.
Okay.
Have the ability to regenerate.
Great. The cells, like it says here, a class of undifferentiated cells that are able to differentiate into a specialized cell. Okay. They come from two sources. Embryos obviously have cells. If you think about that tiny little person that we were talking about again, in that tiny person is the 200 and so different types of tissue that a body is made out of. So we have bone cells, and we have muscle cells, and we have nerve cells, and we have heart cells, and we have blood cells, and all those things come out of undifferentiated stem cells. So we find those both in adults, and we find them in embryos. So because of the prohibitions about using embryonic stem cells, people have been forced, you might say, to start to begin to use adult stem cells. And they really have been very successful in using them. So they've been used to treat a variety of illnesses over the years. But again, as I said, this temptation, this threat to begin to use embryonic tissue, to use aborted tissue for the purpose of using stem cells that can treat human illness is a risk, and it's out there. The goal of stem cell research to treat human illness is good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to be able to use stem cells to do that sort of thing. It's very important. But part of the challenge with stem cell research is that if we begin to use women and we begin to use embryos, then again we are killing people. So using an embryo, we cannot use an embryo for stem cell research, stem cell treatment without killing the embryo itself. So and that's loss of human life. So let's go to the next slide. This one should be a little easier to see. Maybe not. So basically we've got two sources, again, of stem cells, like I was saying. You've got the cells that are harvested from the inner cell mass of the holoblastocyst. Blastocyst is the early division of the original fertilized egg into 8 cells, or the early embryonic human being, 7 to 10 days after fertilization. The embryo at this stage may be about 200 cells in size. So that's the source, again, of embryonic stem cells. Now, in an animal, that's one thing. In a person, this is something totally different. This is a person, and to use their cells, again, means that person dies. So fetal stem cells are often taken from the germline tissues that make up the ovaries or the testes of aborted fetuses. So here we have murder in 2 different forms, using embryos that, again, have been harvested from donated eggs, in vitro fertilization, we'll talk about that a little later, and then the idea of fetal cells. Okay, both of these, which are not compatible with a moral look at life that recognizes that all life is sacred and that God forbids the taking of life. Okay, so there are some life-preserving sources. So what I want you to think of when you hear the idea of stem cell research, some people think, oh no, stem cells, babies, abortion. They don't know that there are life-preserving resources that we can use. So one of them is from cord blood. So the umbilical cord stem cells that are taken from umbilical cord blood are able to be used to treat illness. It's a wonderful thing. The baby doesn't need its cord blood. We clamp the cord and we're able to take blood from the cord and use that for its stem cell potential. That's wonderful. The other thing that's recently been more and more used is placentas. So the placenta is the afterbirth, the organ that feeds the baby during pregnancy, and it's not used. The mom doesn't need it, the baby doesn't need it, she passes it after the birth of the baby. So there are stem cells in the placenta, and those can also be used. So these are moral choices. These are life-preserving choices. And then we have adult stem cells. So tissues like bone marrow, lung, pancreas, brain, breast, all these different tissues contain stem cells that have been isolated. So I'm sure most of you have heard of bone marrow transplants, yes? We're talking about stem cells. We're talking about stem cells from another person, and we've been using those in treatment for over 20 years. So in order to get a bone marrow transplant, you don't have to kill a baby, you don't have to abort a baby. We can use adult cells without harming another person. So, and our knowledge of stem cells is just starting. Like I said, there may be stem cells in each one of the 210 different types of tissue in the human body. So when we look, when we don't settle for just one idea, let's use aborted babies, let's use fetal tissue, let's use embryonic. When we have moral standards, then God will open up new ideas, ways to be able to use His technology to help and heal. So I'm not at all against, and I don't think any Christian should be against stem cell research when it involves these, like I said, life-preserving sources. All right, I think, yeah, and of course with that question comes the definition of human cloning, because cloning is somewhat similar to the same question. Cloning is asexual reproduction, in which an exact genetic copy of another plant, animal, or human is made by fusing the DNA from a human cell, adult cell, into a human egg, from which the genetic material has been removed and then making it grow. So in other words, a clone is a twin, the exact genetic copy of the person or the animal that has been done. And lots of people, movies have taken off on that, haven't they? Clone Wars and all these ideas of people. Well, just this year, so how many of you have heard of, oh, I just lost her name. It's Dixie or Daisy the sheep, right? Dolly, that's it. Dolly, I need to start with the D. So Dolly was the first successful clone. It took years and years of research to make a clone. She was the first one. She lived about 6 years. And then several animals have been cloned since then. But monkeys had never been cloned until just this year. So in January, they were able to clone these little guys right here. And they're cute, of course. You can give me the words back. Yeah. So they used connective tissue cells, and these are long-tailed macaques. Is that how you say it? I'm not sure. At any rate, and they were able to create these oocytes. They put them into 21 surrogate mothers. 6 pregnancies took hold, and 2 developed to full term. So we're talking about 79 eggs and 2 pregnancies. So you can imagine if you're talking about people, okay, with full genetic material that are people, you're sacrificing this many people to get to the clone at the very end. Do you understand what I'm saying? So cloning has been very negatively looked at. The vast majority of the public and countries have banned the idea of human cloning. And when this article was written, I think it's really interesting. I included the headline as well as the article itself. So if you read the article, so here it is: monkeys have been cloned, paving the way for human cloning. Isn't that great? So at the end of the article it says, researchers stress they have no intention of cloning humans. But the person who wrote the article had another intention, didn't they? They wanted to throw in a little spice to his article. They wanted to make it a little controversial. So now we're on our way to make clones. And what I want you to notice here, the challenge and the risk that we're looking at is that when they cloned the babies, they took fetal tissue, and that worked well, okay? And then they used adult cells, and it didn't work. So their idea is that fetal cells have other advantages. Fetal fibroblasts are able to easily grow in the laboratory. They're easy to edit genetically. Did you catch what I'm saying? So the idea is fetal tissue works well, adult tissue doesn't work well. So this cloning business we need to do with fetal stuff. So let's use aborted babies. Do you understand the process? Yeah. So the idea is still out there. Don't think that just because countries are trying to outlaw clone research that it's not going on. And here you have just January this happening somewhere in the Far East, if I remember correctly. All right. So that's cloning and stem cell research. Again, to go back. Stem cell research is a wonderful thing. It's a great possibility for helping for treatment if we use adult research correct or life supporting resources. Okay, so let's go on to infertility and assisted reproduction. Again, in addition to stem cells, this is probably the most hot topic. Yes. Should we be, can we be assisting people who are infertile to have successful pregnancies? So what are the different methods? Let's go over them briefly, okay? First method is induction of ovulation. All right, if we look at the reasons for infertility, there are many. Up to half of the reasons for infertility are male. So induction of ovulation is going to help them, of course. But for the woman who cannot ovulate, there are drugs that can be used, some of them not that expensive, and enable her to be able to ovulate, to have an egg, and then to be able to get pregnant. So that's a technology that's been around for a long time, and I don't think anybody has any problem with. Okay, second one, artificial AIH, artificial insemination using the semen from the husband. In what situations would this happen? Well, in our family, my brother-in-law had cancer before he was married, Hodgkin's testicular cancer, and his sperm count was very, very low after the chemotherapy, the curative treatments that they did. So he and his wife, after 10 years of marriage, being unable to get pregnant, went to a reproductive center. They took his sperm, they concentrated it, and they put it into his wife, and they have 2 lovely daughters. So a wonderful thing. Okay, so same husband and wife, an illness that caused the sperm count to be low, and they were able to have children. I have no problems morally with that procedure. Okay, then we keep going. All right, artificial insemination using semen from a donor. So what kinds of situations are we talking about here? We're talking about a man who doesn't have sperm. Or is, yeah, a person who's unable. Sometimes this is done for women who are gay and want to get married and want to have children. And so they will choose their sperm and they will have it infused. Okay, so we're coming into some moral questions here, aren't we? Okay, we got more than 2 people out there, more than 2 parents. We have a moral challenge. All right, so then it gets deeper. Of course, we've got in vitro fertilization. So you can have, of course, lots of problems that cause the inability to have a pregnancy, to conceive, if the woman especially has tubal injuries. So she makes eggs just fine, but they can't get through, and so they can't be fertilized where they're supposed to be. So they'll take the couple's egg and the couple's sperm and put them together in a test tube, okay? And usually, this is a pretty expensive procedure, as you can imagine. The eggs have to be harvested, so they have to do that with a surgery. They have to use special medications to cause several eggs to be released at once. And then you have several embryos, don't you? Okay? So you've got maybe 5 eggs, maybe 6 eggs, and the sperm, they don't care. There's lots of them. So you mix them together, and you have 6 embryos, 6 little people. Okay, so what are we going to do with these folks? Well, a lot of people in the United States right now that have gone through this procedure have frozen their embryos. It's a process that is not without risk, but only about 10% of embryos die when you unfreeze them, and they're in banks for the couple to use in the future. Okay, so lots of moral questions, aren't there? Lots and lots of moral questions. Is this right? Is this wrong? Okay. All right. And then you have donor egg in vitro fertilization. So a woman doesn't have eggs at all. She can't ovulate. So here you go. Somebody's going to give her an egg. Okay. They're going to harvest eggs from this woman, maybe a poor woman, like I was talking about earlier. She's going to get some money for it, and they're going to impregnate that egg outside the mom, and again, several embryos, and put some of them into mom, and she's going to deliver. So lots of challenges. Yep. Okay. One of the interesting things that has come out of this is actually embryo adoption. So there are women who are unable to get pregnant in their marriage for whatever reason, and so they can buy an embryo and adopt it, and have it put in their bodies, and then if that baby is carried, if it's implanted, if it does all the right things, then they can have a baby with that embryo. So I actually have a friend who adopted an embryo, and she and the embryo went in her body, and she had a baby not too long ago. So fascinating, isn't it? The world. And then you have surrogate mothers, the last option. So that's just the idea that I can't carry a child. Maybe my heart disease is too bad. Maybe my pelvis is injured from a prior car wreck, and so I'm going to have somebody else, have my baby for me. We have lots of biblical examples of that one, don't we? Yeah. So remember, Hagar was the surrogate mother for Sarah because she couldn't get pregnant. So we have examples of this throughout time. So where does God fit into all this? It's a good question, isn't it? Where does He draw the line? Well, let's go over to this list here. So what kind of complications are we looking at? Well, the first one is multiple pregnancies. Ovulation drugs can do that. Obviously, if you're going to put in multiple embryos, as we said, they usually harvest several eggs, and that makes the chance of having a viable pregnancy more likely, then you can have multiple pregnancies. So 3 babies, 4 babies, 5 babies, 6 babies. Yeah. And so the more babies that are growing inside the mom, the less likely it is for those babies to be able to be carried to term, and maybe she'll lose them. All right, embryo loss. Talked about that already a little bit. So what do you do with the extra embryos? You got 6 eggs. Are you going to put all 6 babies in? Are you going to freeze some of the embryos? Or are you just going to give them to research? Are you just going to discard them? Okay? These are people in the eyes of God. All right, and then you have this idea of third-party reproduction. I mean, you can have up to 5 people involved in the whole process. So who's the parent? Is it the woman who carried the baby? Is it the woman who had the egg? Is it the woman who raises the child? Is it the father? You understand? So it's very challenging. You've got a lot of high costs. So is this technology available for everybody? No. All right, again, in rural Uganda, I had women there who were unable to conceive. They were ostracized because, as you know, having children in that part of Africa is very, very important to society. So, but they don't have the access to all this technology that we were talking about. And then, what do you do about this idea about selecting the best embryos? So, should I harvest my eggs? Should I put the sperm in? Then should I do genetic analysis on each one of those to see which one I want? Do I want Sue or Harry or Joe or, do I want blonde hair, blue eyes? Do you understand? So that's the kind of questions. Those are the questions that are opened up right now. Next slide, please. So we took a lot of time on that one, but it's very interesting. Okay. So so these are just quick arguments about against three-parent children. Every person is created by God, bears His image. The Bible is very clear about a unique marital bond between one husband and one wife. Children are a gift of God, a blessing and a fruit of marriage. Marriage is an exclusive covenant ordained by God. And when you put a third person in the marital relationship, scripturally, what happens? Strife and fractured relationships. So, so I know polygamy is a question. We're not going to go there, but there's been in the Bible historically strife and division when you put a third person in the marital relationship. And like I said, you can have up to 5 here. So how many parents for a little baby Sydney or whatever? Yeah. Okay. So those are our questions. And as far as the standard Christian approach to these questions, anything that involves third person involvement in conception is not acceptable. In other words, between a husband and a wife, the church sees that as sacred, and that ability needs to be preserved. In addition to that, we have the question of procreation itself and whether or not it's acceptable for someone to receive someone else's sperm that is not their husband. So, okay, let's go on. All right, let's talk a little bit about right of conscience. We've got about 20 minutes left. So, every health professional should and needs to have the right to refuse to participate in situations or procedures they believe to be morally wrong or harmful to their patient or others. Okay, this is what we call right of conscience. And in such circumstances, healthcare professionals have an obligation to ensure that the patient's records are transferred to someone else. So what are we talking about? We're talking about abortion. We're talking about all the different things that we're discussing today. In reproductive technology, euthanasia, many, many different questions. Okay, give me the other side, please. So, do we have the right to refuse? These are the questions our society has today. Do we have the right to refuse referring for abortion or doing an abortion? In some societies, that right is being questioned. Do we have the right to refuse a person's desire for euthanasia? Is it right for us to say, your life is important, and even though you're suffering, I'm not going to help you end your suffering? Is it right for us to say, just because you're unable to have babies, because you want to do it outside the realms of marriage, I'm not going to help you? And in many societies, they are debating the doctor's right to refuse the patient's request. So, next slide, please. So, what's important? How can we deal with these situations? Because you're going to face them. You're going to face them here. You're going to face them in other places. You're going to face them in your home country, and you're going to be ostracized. People are going to not understand what you do. A girl wrote an article that I was looking at today about when she refused to help with abortions in their hospital as a medical student. One of the nurses said, "I want to show you something." And she walked her into another room and unwrapped an aborted baby and showed it to her. Obviously very, very rude and very cruel. So what do you need to do? You need to learn about your own values. You need to make decisions about what we're talking about today. I can give you some guidelines, but I can't make those decisions for you. You've got to decide. What are you going to be involved with? What are you going to consider as important and what's not? And then you need to draw the line in the sand, as it said, and decide what you consider to be moral and immoral. And stick with that decision. So that's your job. As a medical professional, we can't avoid these things. Like I said before, if we don't decide who's going to get resources, then somebody else is going to do it. Who needs to be making those decisions? Christians need to be making those decisions. So you need to be involved, and you need to decide what you're willing to be a part of and what you're not willing to be a part of. So, and then you need to know the law, because some countries will protect your right of conscience and some countries are debating that right of conscience. So if we look at the next slide, this is the law in Ukraine, okay? It says in their constitution, freedom of belief and religion, freedom of conscience, as well as other basic human rights and freedoms, including the right to freedom of thought and speech, free expression of opinions and convictions, under the Constitution of Ukraine is considered as inalienable and inviolable. So this was the Constitution back in the 90s when it was written, and just in the last 2 years, in 2016, there were some changes made, some mild, slight changes to this whole freedom of religion and conscience. So don't think that it's not out there, that it's not going to happen. People are, and in different ways, Satan is trying to undermine society, trying to strike at the very core of God's of life and the sacredness of life. Okay, let's show the next slide. All right, let's talk a little bit about euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. The role of the physician is to affirm human life, to relieve suffering, and give compassionate, competent care as long as the patient lives. The physician, as well as the patient, will be held accountable by God, the giver and taker of life. So we have a responsibility to guide our patients, to care for our patients, to walk with them down that corridor of end of life. And many of you have had the opportunity to do that. I certainly have. So I like these two statements very much. A lot of my information is from the Christian Medical and Dental Association physician papers. They say we oppose active intervention with the intent to produce death for the relief of suffering, economic considerations, or convenience of patient, family, or society. Pretty clear? We oppose active interventions with the intent to cause death. Okay? But we do not oppose withdrawal or failure to institute artificial means of life support in patients who are clearly and irreversibly deteriorating, in whom death appears imminent beyond reasonable hope of recovery. So let's compare these two, okay? We're talking about when a patient has made the decision that they don't want to be placed on life support. The last couple of years ago, I had several patients like that. I had a woman with very severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease who often, every couple of weeks, would show up in the hospital, would go either on a ventilator or on CPAP. She was very ill, and her lung reserve was very small. Finally, she made the decision with me and her daughter and other family members, of course, that she wasn't going to do that anymore. So we arranged for hospice care. She went home. Obviously, she continued to use her medicines, to use a nebulizer at home, to use her inhalers, but she made the decision she was not going to come in and have intubation or active aggressive treatment, and she died. she died within the next couple of weeks or so. We don't oppose the withdrawal or failure to institute artificial means. But if I had taken away all her medications, taken away all her inhalers, taken away her nebulizer, said, you know, let's just, or given her a little shot of something to take away her misery and put her across the line, that would have been suicide. That would have been either murder or suicide, depending on what she was requesting, okay? So, does that make sense? Do you see the difference between those two? So we recognize the right and responsibility of all physicians to refuse to participate in modes of care that violate their moral beliefs or conscience. We're back to that same question again. While rejecting euthanasia, we encourage the development and use of alternatives to relieve human suffering and provide human companionship. So often, when people decide that they're only going to use euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, when they throw all their morals out the window, then it becomes a focus, something that they demand. And so we're going to talk a little bit about autonomy. If you'll give me right over here, this side, we're just going to talk, not that one, but this one, yeah. So autonomy, okay, is the decision of a patient to decide what treatment he wants. Patient autonomy is important. We respect it. It has two sides to it. It's a negative right, okay? It provides the patient with the veto power over a proposed medical intervention that might be recommended by the patient's doctor. In other words, I can't make a patient do anything. I can't make a patient be intubated. I can't make a patient be take any treatment that he doesn't want. But it is not a positive right permitting the patient to request and receive any intervention that he or she desires. Okay? So that's the difference. That's the balance of autonomy. So again, my patient is not, it's not acceptable for my patient to say, you know, I'm tired, I'm in pain, I want you to give me a good shot that'll you know, take my breathing out and I'll pass away. That's not an acceptable use of the patient's autonomy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? So, all right, let's look at the last couple. I don't know if we have time for homosexuality. I think this is a question that we've definitely covered, that we hear about often. There's just two things that I want to say about homosexuality. One is that we live in a fallen world. We're all fallen creatures. And that fall is expressed in many ways, one of them being sexuality. All of us have temptations to be involved in illicit sexual relationships. Some of them are same-sex, some of them are opposite sex. But all of us have temptations. So having a temptation to be involved in same-sex relationships isn't any different from having a temptation to be involved in heterosexual relationships. Do you understand what I'm saying? We can't say that we're worse or better than anybody else, okay? So the desire and the thoughts are not sinful in themselves, but the act. And as we know, when we continue to think about erotic things, when we begin to look at pornography, when we think about that woman who is not our wife, when we undress her with our eyes, when we continue, we fall into sin, okay? And that's exactly what happens with the homosexual. So the homosexual is tempted in another way. He's tempted in a way, unfortunately, that's not a biblical way. There's no way for his relationship desires to be fulfilled. The Bible doesn't talk about homosexual relationships in a healthy way. It's not the model of the church, the unity between Christ and the church that God has given us in marriage. So we need to love these people, and we need to help them. We need to understand that they're tempted, but they can walk away. They can walk away from their homosexuality. And Christian healthcare professionals that hold to a biblical or traditional view of homosexuality relationships should tolerate it and not discriminate against. So last thing, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but healthcare professionals should avoid participating in any reproductive technology procedures in which children are brought into a family other than that of a married husband and wife. That includes a homosexual family. So unfortunately, I have a family member in my family right now, a very close one, who is lesbian, and she is attempting to get pregnant by in vitro fertilization because she wants children with her partner. So yeah, as a physician, I would not be able to provide that. All right, let me think how much we've got left. The Human Genome Project is probably the last one that we'll talk about. I think it's the last one on the list. So when we talk about genetic engineering, we alluded to it earlier, that this idea of being able to pick Harry or Joe or Linda, or when my embryos are sitting out here and I can pick which one it is has become a reality since 2003. So the Human Genome Project went on for about 13 years. They coded over 22,000 genes with 3.3 billion base pairs. So that's what God has put into every single one of our cells. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, incredibly made. So, so having this knowledge of genetics right now has a lot of positive aspects to it. We can find lost children, we can earlier detect genetic diseases, we can develop gene therapies, we can look at new drug designs, we can catch criminals, but there are a lot of negatives. Okay, loss of privacy. Do you really want your doctor, your lawyer, your neighbor to know all of your genetic code? Do you want everybody to know everything about you? Do you want to be discriminated against? There are two ideas, positive eugenics and negative eugenics, both of which are geared towards not excluding people from society who are less than the best, less than perfect. So the idea of positive genetics is what Hitler and the Nazis did. They wanted to facilitate childbearing about those who were thought to have desired physical and intellectual characteristics in order to create the master race. Yeah, Harry looks better than Jane, in my embryos here lined up, right? So I'm gonna put Harry in because I want this perfect person. And that idea of genetic engineering is becoming a reality. So negative eugenics were practiced probably in many countries. In the United States, there were laws about them to discourage childbearing among those with mental or physical disabilities. They sterilized hundreds, thousands of people in the United States with the focus of trying to get rid of mental or physical disabilities. So, what does God think about that? Is a disability really bad? Is it wrong for a child to grow up as a Down's child? Is a person less than whole because he can't hear? Because he has disability, can't walk like other people? Does that mean that he's not a good person? So lots and lots of moral judgments in this question. Give me the next slide, please. So basically, you have these two ideas. You have genetic engineering, which is kind of what I was talking about before, either using somatic cells or, again, embryo manipulations, where you're taking the embryo and trying to change something. You found out about its genetic code, it didn't work, and so you're going to change it. Or you're using somatic cells, which can help to replace a gene and are not connected at all with losing life. Or the other side here. Or you have, so that's genetic engineering, some benefit to that. Or you have re-engineering, which is, again, trying to improve on traits and make us all superhumans. So everybody should be able to run the mile in less than 4 minutes. Everybody should be able to run the 100 meters faster than Bolt. everybody should have the perfect face, you know, the perfect height. I don't know what the perfect height is. You know, the perfect dress size. Yeah. So this is the whole idea of re-engineering. It's not directed at healing or restoration, but a change simply because change is desired. Okay, which basically says to God, you know, I'm not as important. What you created isn't good, and those people that seem to be inferior are you know, make God out to make His creations look very inferior. Okay, let's see. So genetic engineering has lots of risks. Probably the greatest being that once we start it, where are we going to stop it? How are we going to change it? You know, maybe somebody's going to decide that you know, white color, none of those. We don't want any white people in the earth. Let's get rid of that. Again, curly hair, no curly hair. We don't want curly hair. Like I said, abuses are going to be very difficult to detect or prevent, and who's going to be making those decisions? That's why Christians have to be on the forefront of these things. I really encourage you, as a believer, to learn and to understand and to be involved with what's going on in medical ethics in your country, in your society. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Give me the last slide. So this is just one final statement. This is the ethics statement of CMDA. It's a short statement, and we're just going to read it as something that principles that we again can follow. We will do no harm to our patients by acts of either omission or commission. We are dedicated to the prevention and relief of human pain and suffering. We hold all human life to be sacred as created God's image. We respect the confidentiality of all communications exchanged with our patients. We affirm the standard of honesty in all circumstances. We believe that our patients have the right to be carefully taught about all aspects of their disease and treatment so that they may give consent that is properly informed. We pursue excellence in demonstrated medicine, the advancement of research and education, and are dedicated to the service of all persons, regardless of the state of their economic resources, the nature of their illness, the color of their skin, the curl of their hair, the color of their eyes, whether they live, whether their hearing is bad. All of them are created by God. Let's maybe, Pastor, would you pray? Here, yeah, you have a question, go ahead.
You want to give that to her so she can, yeah, why don't you come up here and say it?
I have a few questions to ask. I'm actually, let's say, struggling a bit with the mentality that embryos are people. Because, for instance, two people who are ASAs that get married, they do something called pretesting of their embryos, for example. They fertilize their embryos, and the ones that have the SS, they discard it or something, instead of bringing the children into the world to suffer. Would you also say that those people are, in a way, killing human beings? One would know the quality of life of those children. It would be very bad. And in cases where, for example, there are some women who maybe are very career-driven or career-oriented, who will not want children in the beginning. They try to freeze their embryos with their partners, and maybe they usually do a lot of it sometimes, maybe like 6 or 7, and end up using like 3, and the rest is probably discarded or given to people to adopt. We used to say that is questionable. And also, embryo adoption, won't you still say it's the same as adopting a child? Just maybe a woman who can carry pregnancy and she wants to experience what it feels like to be pregnant, then adopt somebody else's embryo. And also, people, for example, this is very hypothetical what could happen. A woman who doesn't want to have a child but she donates her eggs for medical purposes. She doesn't know if they are going to make it into an embryo. And as she said, many of those things, they bring about cure to some diseases. It would have gone to waste if she didn't donate it. So either way, she advanced medicine, and it would have still gone to waste either way. So I don't know, maybe to me, it doesn't seem like a lot. I'm asking, especially with the ones of babies who are sick, the SS baby. If you don't want to have like a designer baby, or having like an extra genetic coding to cure the disease, is it a bad thing?
Thanks for all your questions. Don't know if I can answer them all. I guess these are the kinds of debates that people have been bringing up in the last 100 years. The technology is available. Does it really matter? Is it really life or not? And so that's where we have to decide whether the scriptures actually go back to the beginning of life again. If they are, So really, where does life start? That's the question. That very small embryo has the ability to develop into a full exponential person with every characteristic of life, just like I have today. So I feel strongly that that embryos are living people with every potential, just like I feel that 6-week pregnancies or 8-week pregnancies are living children when they are aborted, and that's murder. So I don't think you can take a date or a time. I think you have to take it all the way back to fertilization, to conception. So there are options. Personally, I don't have a lot of trouble with embryo adoption, but I can understand people that would, because again, you're involving someone who is not your husband. So I'm plus or minus with that one, because again, that person otherwise would die, otherwise be discarded, otherwise not be cared for, not be allowed the chance to become to live a full life. So, but I don't know that I can agree with people who donate their eggs to science, not knowing what people are going to do with that genetic information, not knowing what's going to happen with their eggs, not knowing if they're going to live or die. Obviously knowing that it's very possible that the moral standards of the research person and my moral standards are not the same. So yeah, I guess that's, did that answer some of your questions? Yeah.
Praise God. I would like to add this to the what you said. Try the first one. Right? I got interested so much on the ASTS issue. Like you rightly said, a lot of debate will come into it and will be an issue. I want to say that as believers, once you become born again, you give your life to Christ. You have to be very, very careful with certain things we do, even as regard genetics, medicine. You see, there is a pretest counseling you go in for before you get married. You understand? And if you are aware that your heirs and your partner's heirs, you know, there are choices you could take. You understand? And don't forget hypocritical oaths. If you look at hypocrites, who invariably will not even say is a believer or is a Christian, but that oath is very, very essential. If you look at what the oath says, one after the other, you want to feel that maybe God was actually the one behind the origin of those oaths. He gave to us to guide our practice. And one of the oaths says that we must respect every form of life, right from the point of what? Conception. Meaning that once you have fertilization, you have life already. So back to that aspect you're talking about, you have a decision to take or to make. Your ears, the guy's ears, and you feel strongly probably that God is leading you into the relationship. Well, fine. Why can't you pray? You could change something. Hello. The Bible says with God nothing shall be possible. So you could pray, you could change either your genotype, asking God to do the change, or his, or even both. Yes. I know a colleague who was SS who prayed. He had the two results. We are trained University of Benin. He had the two results. Tells us he was SS. God changed it. I think they. So there's nothing God could not do. You could take that chance and pray and get it changed. One. The second chance is if you can't do that, you cannot get it changed before getting into marriage. Then maybe you could think of quitting the relationship. Understand? But if you go into the relationship thinking that, oh, okay, I can apply genetic technology and it's fertilized, and you look at it and say, oh, this is SS. So let's discard it. It's like you are killing a human being. So you have a choice to make. It's not like there are no choices. You understand? So why don't you take the choice that will bring glory to God? Praise God.
Any other questions? More? Praise God.
My question is about abortion in the case where maybe the woman is having a problem, probably like ectopic pregnancy, and you're probably at the delivery room and she's bleeding. Maybe it wasn't detected early, and then you're at the delivery room and she's bleeding. And what should you do? Can you, because I think medically it's allowed to terminate the pregnancy. So what, as a Christian, what do you do in that situation?
Ectopic pregnancy, is that your question?
Yes, or even any other, like maybe complicated pregnancies. Then also I want to ask concerning still about pregnancy, if the person or if the fetus has like a genetic problem, a very severe one, not just a deformity, it would be a very severe one. For instance, I'm like Edwards, I know that they hardly live till like birth. Yeah, so like, but some of the fetuses die before birth. So do you wait for the fetus to die, maybe terminate the pregnancy? So that's the, then also another question, I think it's kind of depends on the place where you are. The issue of DNR, like do not resuscitate. So I know some people have that as tattoos on your chest. So if a patient falls on the floor and you see DNR, you don't resuscitate, you just leave the person to die, or what do you do as a Christian? Those are my questions.
Great. Yeah, as far as ectopic pregnancy is concerned, if there are some people here who don't understand what an ectopic pregnancy is, it's a pregnancy that grows outside of the uterus. Well, whereas abdominal pregnancies occasionally can be carried to term, most of the time ectopic pregnancies cannot. They're incompatible with life. And so we have not found a way to take that baby and reimplant it into the uterus and allow it to grow. I wouldn't be surprised if people continue to work on that, they may be able to do that. But at this point in time, those babies can't live till term. And so if they're not removed from the mother, then the mother will die. So I don't have any trouble with that. Yeah, there are lots of different pregnancy complications, and some of them occur before a viable pregnancy, some of them occur after a viable pregnancy, after the baby's actually viable. So if you're able to deliver a baby early and the baby can survive outside the womb, then that's wonderful. If the baby's not able to survive outside the womb, then usually the decision is made, again, by the family that the baby's going to die and the mother's going to live. That's a question that is a hard question, and thankfully it doesn't come up very often. If you look at the numbers, the number of people who actually have to have their pregnancies terminated for physical reasons, real physical reasons, are very, very small. Whereas before abortion was legalized, the number of women who had their pregnancies terminated for psychological reasons, in other words, they were coming up with some reason, were very high. So most of the time we don't face that question. And then when we do, we just have to take it individually. We have to decide, can we deliver that baby now? Is it possible for the baby to live outside the womb or not? I guess the last point about whether or not to resuscitate, any form of artificial, when a person's heart stops, if I don't do anything, they're going to die. If a person has said that they don't want me to restart their heart, that they don't want me to treat their bad rhythm that's causing their circulation to be disrupted, then I don't have a problem with that. So that's still their question. Until, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago, no one ever had the opportunity to have their heart restarted. That technology wasn't available. Everybody who had a bad rhythm, they just died. So now we have it, but I'm not saying that everybody has been forced into having artificial means to support their life. Does that make sense? I think what we'd like to do is put any other questions tomorrow, because your time's already up. So I'm going to be here one more time tomorrow, and we're going to talk about tropical diseases, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions then too. Okay?